Welcome to part two of the video entitled College Students Fund Their Own Loans. And this is the second video in this college video series. And we've proven, we've proven the definition of a loan, extension of credit, lending in the first video is a misnomer in how we've been programmed to believe. We read the definition of the Federal Reserve from the Federal Reserve document saying that a loan, extension of credit, lending is when the bank purchases your investment, which is your security, your promissory note, your bond, draft, bill of exchange, banker's acceptance, etc. Banks don't do deposits and they don't make loans, right? In the sense that they're giving us something, unless they're giving us their property, such as currency, and they don't do that anymore, right? Even when they did that, it was still an exchange, right? Because we also had the ability to create value, right? As an economic quantity, we have personal wealth, which is the ability and autonomous right to create credit, right? And what is money? Money is nothing but credit. These things, such as gold, silver, banknotes, they are just token to our credit, right? So there's no intrinsic value in gold. There's no intrinsic value in a Bitcoin, right? The value comes about through the economic quantity of a performance of exchange, value for value, or if it's not value for value, then the residual, the person that gave the less, becomes a debtor, right? So that is an economic principle. You cannot exchange value for value and then say that somebody owes you anything, right? And as a matter of fact, if you give someone something, right, you give them an asset, how can they come back and say you owe them something, right? They're asking you to pay twice because you gave them initial payment. And in this case, the initial payment is the promise to pay, which is the investment, the security, the note, the bond, the draft, bill of exchange that you gave them, right? Banks purchase securities. They don't do deposits and they don't make loans in the sense, which is the misinformation of a definition that they're giving you something. The definition given by the Federal Reserve in 1939, which is the same definition to this day, and this is backed up by the bank's balance sheet when they engage in a transaction. The definition of lending, extension of credit, and loan is when the bank purchase your investment, your note, your draft, your bill of exchange. You give them something. That's how the asset side of their the asset side of their balance sheet increases, right? So for a student, when the student gives them that master promissory note, you are giving the bank value and consideration, and they have contracted with you to do an exchange, right? Now, I would recommend that this is put in writing and attached to the master promissory note, but you run the risk of them saying that they don't want to do business with you, because the norm is for you to just give them your asset. And if you look in your state code, It's going to define an asset as a note. A negotiable instrument is a promissory note, is a draft, a bond, right? And a bond is nothing but a promissory note. As a matter of fact, a promissory note is the is the basis of the banking system. It is the most prevalent instrument that we use in making banking transactions, right? A promise to pay is a promissory note, and the promise to pay is credit that you're giving them because you are given consideration and value on both sides of the balance sheet because you're giving them value and consideration. They don't give you nothing. However, because of you have an exchange, a contractual agreement, when the bank accepts your promissory note, they accept a contractual agreement of an exchange. They supposed to give you the same value and consideration, which is called in law a deposit, which is under the liability side of the bank's balance sheet, which is the debt the bank owes you. And on the liability side, you become the general creditor for that deposit, and they are the debtor, right? But as I also said in the first video, you need to get a certificate of deposit. A certificate of deposit is evidence that they owe you money, right? Other than, so you don't have to go through a whole bunch of changes, and then you can understand how the game is played, right? But we've been programmed to believe that our investment, our bond, which is a promissory note, our draft or our promissory note, our security that we give them and say, okay, this is our promise to pay. We don't understand that that is an actual payment. And it is a payment because the bank asset increases once they accept it. We can't say that they make a deposit because the deposit in law, 12 USC 813, paragraph L, defines a deposit as the bank's debt, right? That they put in like a deposit account, checking savings, right? They're obligated to do that, right? But you need that certificate of deposit, which is a receipt, so you don't have to go through changes. And then everybody's clear that they also have a reciprocal obligation to pay you because you're giving them something. They're not giving you nothing, right? So, and that master promissory note for a college student is that's your payment for your tuition. Whatever the face value is on that master promissory note is what the bank is going to increase their asset by. And if they're increasing their asset, they are engaging in an exchange and they need to give you a reciprocal consideration and value, or value and consideration, because you gave them value and consideration. They accepted what is it? They accepted the note for value and consideration. So they need to reciprocate because it is an exchange. And not only do you create credit, as an autonomous being in itself, right? Because you have impetus, right? Force, movement, right? Labor, which is those things are backing your credit. A bank, which is a persona, an illusion, it's an illusion, has no ability to create credit, right? The bank is engaging in accounting. So what an account is, it's simply accounting that the bank keeps in their electronic ledger. And the bank is, by law, the bank supposed to keep um, electronic documents, right? So, and we can, I can show you that by law, the bank is supposed to keep records. So under 12 CFR 12.3, record keeping, the bank is supposed to keep a record for the transaction for customers, right? So when you say for instance, you use a credit card and then you're saying, I already paid you because I gave you a promise to pay, which is a payment, and the asset side of your balance sheet increased. And then the bank is going to come back and say, well, I got a record of purchases here that you made. And you can say, yes, you got a record because by law, you're supposed to keep records of the purchases of your customers. Like you're saying it like that's supposed to justify you not paying me the deposit from when you purchased my security because I didn't give it to you for free because you under the law you got to purchase my security. I didn't give it to you for free. On my understanding, which is how I contracted with you, is that we're doing an exchange. I gave you consideration and value, and I'm under the um, you know, I'm under um, the intent of you giving me consider reciprocal consideration and value, right? So when that's one of the things that they say to throw you off, like, yeah, we got uh record of your purchases. Like, yeah, you're supposed to keep that. That's what the law says. You're supposed to keep that. This is also in your state code, right? Um, I'm in Maryland, so there's also in different parts of your state code. But you can research it as far as your state code. Just research, say, record keeping, whatever your state code is called, record keeping for banking transaction or financial transaction, and you should uh, get some hits. So if the federal law is a precursor to state law, so it's definitely in your state law, just as it is in Maryland, state of Maryland, uh, commercial law, or what it's called the Uniform Commercial Code of the state of Maryland, right? Not the Uniform Commercial Code with the sovereign citizen movement. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the Uniform Commercial Code that's on Cornell University website. That's not a state law. We're not talking about the private Uniform Commercial Code, although many of the state law is in line with the text of that private Uniform Commercial Code on Cornell Law University website. We're talking about state law, and the title of that section of the code is called the Uniform Commercial Code, right? So it'd be the State of Maryland Uniform Commercial Code, and if you're in Virginia, it'd be the State of Virginia Uniform Commercial Code, so forth and so on. So the bank is supposed to keep record. I got rid of that. So the bank is supposed to keep record of your purchases. So let's see if we can go back to, okay. So let's try to find where it defines what or how banks create credit. And in here, it'll tell you that it's an exchange. Okay. So I'm gonna start on page 83, and this document is the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve System, its purposes and functions, right? And it was written in 1939 or distributed in 1939. There's other updated versions, but of course, I'm pretty sure they took the good stuff out. I think it is a 2016. There's a 1947 version as well, but I think each version get watered down and they take the good stuff out that we're interested in. Um, but I haven't read the 2016. I believe that's the year. I haven't read that yet, but I'm sure we can find some good stuff in there too, because you can only hide good information if people know what they're looking for. You can't hide it. Okay, so we're going to start on 83. Now, initially, they're going to talk about how the Federal Reserve actually make loans with the Federal Reserve banks. And it's essentially the same, but, you know, we're talking about the Federal Reserve and the commercial bank being the Federal Reserve customer or member. And then the other classification is the Federal Reserve banks or commercial banks with the Federal Reserve member banks and their customer, which is the consumers, which is customer, which is us, right? So this part is about the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve member banks. It says the lending and investment power of the Federal Reserve banks is not derived from member bank reserve deposits, and larger required reserve balances do not increase that power. The lending power of the Federal Reserve is a statutory power whereby the Federal Reserve may acquire promissory notes, acceptances, bonds, and other obligations and give in exchange, right? Give in exchange. It says give in exchange. So they acquire it, which means they purchase it, right? So when we talk about Public Law 73-1, you're going to see that word acquire, but that word acquire means purchase, right? So the Federal Reserve Bank may acquire, purchase promissory notes, acceptances, bonds, and other obligations, right? Debt obligations, and give in exchange right? Key term right here. Give. The key term is in, well, give in, the key term is exchange. If you're an exchanging, you're exchanging value for value. If you exchange and there is the deficit, the person that's doing the exchange that's given the deficit becomes the debtor. So to fulfill, the total value of what they receive. But we give an exchange value for value, consideration for consideration, and they supposed to reciprocate. When we give them, they supposed to reciprocate. The Federal Reserve Bank may acquire promissory notes, acceptances, bonds, and other obligations and give in exchange, therefore, Federal Reserve notes or credit. What do they give? Federal Reserve notes or credit. Generally, they give credit, right, to the reserve accounts, or they may give Federal Reserve notes because the banks may need Federal Reserve notes if somebody come in to cash their check and then they put some in the bank and then take some, maybe it's Christmas and a lot of cash is spent around Christmas time, or paper money, rather. Um, Federal Reserve banks may acquire promissory notes, acceptances, bonds, and other obligations and give it in exchange. And give in exchange, therefore, Federal Reserve notes or credit to the reserve accounts of member banks, right? The member banks are commercial banks. The member banks of Federal Reserve system are commercial banks, such as Bank of America, um, American Express, etc. Their ability to lend and to purchase securities is not limited by the volume of funds deposited with them by their member banks. So the funds deposited with them, right? So they purchase the security and then the deposit is what they owe. Now, we don't pay attention to this because I'm not sure if they defined that word in 1939 as a bank's debt. But here, I believe it's being used in the sense that it says it's not limited by the volume of funds deposited with them by their member banks. So if they deposit funds with them, right, we got to stop using it in the sense that they gave them something. It's a sense that they purchased the security, as they said here. So they don't take deposits either, but the deposited with them, they have to be using it in the sense that they owe the member banks a debt because they purchased the securities of the member banks. But but if they are saying that it is deposited with them, then they're using that word in the context of a misnomer, right? Wrongly using that word. Now, as I said, I don't know what if deposit was defined in 1940 as a bank debt, but we clearly see here the Federal Reserve purchase, right, the commercial bank securities or their commercial the member bank securities, which are the commercial bank. Now, Now we get into the part where they're talking about the commercial bank, which is the Federal Reserve member banks, engaging us purchasing our investment, promissory note, bond, draft, exchange, etc., securities, etc. Right? And I think based on what we read, the definition of lending is It correlates. Easy, right? So you should get this. Credit in general is a matter of monetary agreement. That is significant, right? We're talking about an exchange is a monetary agreement. That's a contract. So when they don't pay you, um, other than I wouldn't even engage, I would say that my controversy or my case is based off of a breach of contract because it's a monetary agreement that you have for them to your exchange. The agreement is an exchange of value and consideration for both parties, right? You give them something and then they're supposed to reciprocate. That's an exchange. And the economic quantity of exchange also creates credit, right? Creates value, right? Because if you have something and then somebody else has something, and then you swap, make an exchange, you're usually it's usually a value for value exchange, right? You're giving them consideration and value at equal measure. And if this person gives you value and consideration that's greater than the value and consideration that this person is given, right, then this person is going to be in debt to this person. But that's not what's happening because you're initially given the value, they're purchasing your security on credit. And once their asset side goes up, they perform double entry bookkeeping, meaning that what's on the amount that's on the asset side must be reflected on the liability side, right? And that ties into an exchange, the contractual agreement. Because if you have an amount on the asset side and then you create a deposit, which is the bank's debt, you then have a general creditor. But the easiest way for you to get your money is to demand your certificate of deposit, which is your bank receipt that you, and it should list the amount of money that they owe you, right? And we're going to read that that bank receipt is also a promissory note. I hope you're getting this because is that word promissory note, as I said, is the basis of the banking system, I believe, right? So credit in general is a matter of monetary agreement, right? That's how credit is created. The essence of it being an acceptable promise to pay. What? An acceptable promise to pay, which is credit. Promise to pay is credit. Your promissory note is a promise to pay. It is credit. Where does it come from? It comes from you because you are, they refer to you as the transmitting utility that has electricity flowing throughout his body, has impetus, right, which is movement, force, right, which correlates to your labor, right, and also your intellectual thinking performance, right, because energy creates your intellectual thinking performance that translate into um, different can't remember the word, but don't want to say enzymes, but different mechanisms, fluids, and electricity triggering things that's creating the thought, right? That's pulling it from the spiritual realm because you are connected, right? Most of us are anyway. Um, Credit in general is a matter of monetary agreement, the essence of it being an acceptable promise to pay. Bank credit is a special form of credit, peculiar in that it involves a promise or assumption of liability by the bank. That is the reciprocal contractual performance that the bank has, right? It involves a promise or assumption, or you could say a promise to pay or assumption of liability by a bank given in exchange for a promise made to the bank. I'm reading slow so you can understand it, right? Um, Excuse the dramatics. Thus, a bank accepts the promissory note of a customer, accepts purchase, right? And in exchange, there's that word again, promise to pay the customer a corresponding equal amount, which pending his order, the customer order, is carried on its books, the bank, right? It's can't be talking about the customer, is carried on its books as a deposit. And a lot of things that's written by academia, people in the banking industry, they'll say one thing, use words in one context, and then use it in another. Although deposited and deposit, some may say, is two different words or are two different words. But, you know, the common person may think that it's the same thing. But you just got to understand that they're going to try to manipulate you in the text. And so the text, anything that you read from the banking system or anybody in academia, a lawyer, you have to filter that document, right? And I'll show you what I mean when we look at the definitions of promissory note and certificate of deposit. Um, so um, the bank, thus a bank accepts a promissory note of a customer and in exchange promise to pay the customer a corresponding amount, which pending his order is carried on the bank's books as a deposit, which is a bank's debt in his favor. His is the customer, right? Bank credit plays a bank credit plays a vitally important part in modern economic life as a source of bank deposits transferable by check. It provides the funds with which the bulk of monetary performances is affected. So bank credit is created from the bank purchasing your investment. And here they're saying that it is the bulk, it provides the funds which the bulk of monetary payments are affected. So basically, they're saying that you create the majority of the money in the economy, in the money supply. And we'll read more about that, right? And as I've said, that this economy is a consumer economy. We've been trained to be consumers, purchasers, right? And consumers, we've been trained to be purchasers, not people that um, we're. We've been trained to consume as much as we can, right? And that affects how the economy runs. The more consumption you have, the more spending, and the healthier the economy, right? That's the theory. But we used to think of that being a deficit, specifically certain groups of people, right? Especially the poorer class of people, right? And those demographic in that classification. But now we realize that being a consumer and programmed to consume is actually a power position if we understand how to use it, because we are the economy. We create the purchasing power, right, with our credit. Or you could say we create the purchasing power by engaging in an contractual exchange with the bank, right, to create credit, which is the bulk of the monetary supply, the bulk of the money, because credit is money. It's always been money. There's nothing intrinsic. Gold doesn't have intrinsic value, right? It's just that we say it has value, right? Silver, all these different things doesn't have intrinsic value. Human beings are one of um, the entities on this planet that has intrinsic value. Other things may, and certain animals may have intrinsic, well, all animals have intrinsic value because they're tied to the ecosystem, right? And it is a balancing act with the ecosystem. So they also have intrinsic value. But gold, it may have intrinsic value this year, and then we may outlaw it, and then there's no intrinsic value no more. So um bank credit plays a vitally important part in modern economic life. As a source of bank deposit transferable by check, it provides the funds with which the bulk of monetary payments is affected. It is also interchangeable with legal tender, right? So your promissory note, your negotiable instrument, your security is legal tender. And under Public Law 73-1, you will see that it's legal tender, right? Specifically, Title 4 of Public Law 73-1, right? Which is the Emergency Banking Act of March 9th, 1933, which is, I believe, is the law that the entire banking system is sitting on. That's how pivotal that law is, I believe. It is the father of modern banking system in America, right? You know, as far as the law is concerned. Um, so that is definitely an important law, and in conjunction with um, the congressional record of March 9th, 1933, which is also important, Public Law 73-10, which is also important. So you couple those, there was another one that I wanted to mention, but can't think of it right now. But um, you add those things, and that will help you understand that uh, your promissory note is not only valuable, it is credit, and it is money, right? Because money has always been credit. It always been created from the two ways. You saying that this is valuable, right? And you having a promise to pay, and then also being able to exchange those economic quantities. right? Um, so as we have seen, this is how credit is created. Credit is created from the definition, right? From the definition of page 40 in this Federal Reserve document. Let me read the definition of what a loan, lending, and an extension of credit is, right? So we can say that you're the one giving the extension of credit because before the bank gets a credit or increase in cash under their asset side, there must be first an exchange of credit to the bank, or um, there must be, the bank has to put itself in debt, right? Right. There must first be an extension of credit to the bank. And that extension of credit creates the exchange of, and you create uh, consideration and value on both sides of the balance sheet. The bank duty is to reciprocate what you gave them, right? And through the exchange and the matching principle of accounting and double entry bookkeeping and the other principles of GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, credit is created, the bank increased their asset, and then they owe you reciprocal credit. I'm sorry, yeah, reciprocal credit, or as the Federal Reserve document says, credit, Federal Reserve notes or credit. But we know that they pay out in credit now. They give you a demand deposit account, a checking account, right? Generally, or they put it in savings or some type of account, which is simply accounting, right? In their blockchain of electronic spreadsheets, right? That's distributed over an integrated network that is used for calculation, right? As it is their accounting system, right? As we have QuickBooks, they got a higher grade of an accounting system, but they're both electronic ledgers. So let's read what the definition of loan, lending, and extension of credit is again. It says, as this and the preceded paragraph indicate, a bank purchase investment uh, all these blue dots. It can look a little clearer. Okay. As this and the preceding paragraph indicate, a bank purchase of investments, i.e., bonds, which includes promissory notes, securities, mortgages, right, is also a promise to pay. It's a promissory note, etc., is an extension of credit just as a loan is, right? So, what is a loan? A loan is when the bank purchase your security, right? What is an extension of credit? So you give the extension of credit when the bank purchase your security because they purchase it on credit. So you're giving them an extension of credit that they use to document under the asset side of their balance sheet. And the reciprocal documentation is under the liability side, which is the deposit, which is defined as the bank's debt that they owe the general creditor, which is you, the issuer of the security. right? Or the seller of the security, right? Because the bank is the purchaser, right? And if you understand um, purchase, sale, and purchase, right? It's an exchange, value for value, based off of a contractual agreement. Is no different. Wow, is it that simple? It's that simple, right? But we've been programmed to believe misinformation. As this and the preceding paragraph indicate, a bank's purchase of investment, i.e., bonds, mortgages, securities, promissory notes, etc., is an extension of credit, just as a loan is, and the bank investments increase bank deposits, which is the bank debt, right? The bank investments increase the bank debt. The deposit is the bank's debt. So when the bank purchases, it gets an increase on both sides of the balance sheet. Their asset goes up and their debt goes up, just as bank loans do. When they do a loan, same thing. They purchase the security, asset increase, their liability or deposit, their debt increase that they owe the general creditor, which is the issuer of the security, right, or the seller of the security. For the sake of simplicity, right? This is where it clarifies everything. For the sake of simplicity, the terms lending and extension of credit are often used where the purchase of investments, and what did we say investments were? Bonds, mortgages. Um, Investments also include promissory notes, because a promissory note is a financial asset as defined in your state law. It is also a security as defined in your state law, federal and state law. Um, right? So, for the sake of simplicity, the term lending and extension of credit are often used where the purchase of investments by banks as well as lending by banks is meant. So when they say we're going to give you a loan, that means that they're going to purchase your security, right? That means that they're going to owe you a debt. That means that you got to let them know that you want your certificate of deposit that proves that they're purchasing your security, your promise to pay. And when you give them that security, that is your payment. And if you understand how to endorse it properly and write across it diagonally, paid in full, then the bank, or you could say paid in full and let and have them understand that, and you got to put this in the contract and attach it to the note, that this is full payment of the obligation, right? Because you're doing an equal exchange for the face value of that note or whatever the obligation that you'd agreed to, right? The obligation should match the face value of the note, right? Um, so I'll just explain two ways: get the certificate of deposit, or you try to satisfy or discharge the debt right there when you sign that um, promissory note, right? And I'm not telling you do anything. I'm just giving you some information. Just want to understand that. So if you go out there and do stuff and you don't understand what you're doing fully, then that's on you. You are an adult and we need to take personal responsibility. So if I was you, I would do more research, right? But I'm available through communication performance consultancy if there is a question or I can give you some type of commercial assistance. So let's read the last sentence again. For the sake of simplicity, the term lending and extension of credit are often used where the purchase of investments by banks as well as lending by banks is meant. And the investment, as we said, is a security, your note, your bill of exchange, your draft, your bond, your mortgage. Your mortgage is a promise to pay, no different than a promissory note. So, okay, we're going to define, there's more that we're going to go over, but we maybe in the third paragraph, I'll start going over more documents. But I'm going to go over a um, what a promissory note is as defined in the state of Maryland law, which is should be consistent with the commercial law in your state or your state's uniform commercial code, right? And I'm going to show you that the language as for the definition of a promissory note is basically the same language as a certificate of deposit, and they are two sides of the same coin, right? Okay, let's do that. Okay, so the Maryland law is the commercial law, which is the Uniform Commercial Code, but this is a private listing of the state law, right? So they got Maryland uh, Commercial Code, but it's really the Uniform Commercial Code. And you can use, I think those State of Maryland Commercial Law or State of Maryland Uniform Commercial Code, they're synonymous, but the technical name is the Uniform Commercial Code, and that applies to your state as well. So let's go down and see what a certificate of deposit is, right? Which is a receipt that the bank gives you, the bank receipt. Certificate of deposit means an instrument containing an acknowledgement by a bank that a sum of money has been received by the bank and a promise to pay by the bank to repay the sum of money. A certificate of deposit is a note of the bank. They're giving you a promissory note. So let me go show you, right? So that is on, that is coming, that's correlated to the liability side where your deposit is, because they're giving you a certificate of deposit, which is a note of the bank, and it's an acknowledgement that they receive a sum of money and that they have to repay that sum of money. And if it's a note, you can walk into the bank and deposit that note. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. You can walk into the bank and collect your deposit with that note, which is a promise to pay. The bank, the certificate of deposit is the bank's promise to pay, is the bank's promissory note that they owe you money and they got to repay it. But if you give somebody your note and you don't get a certificate of deposit or you don't discharge the contract or the note, right, the debt with the correct endorsement and with um, the correct documentation on the note, right, paid in full, you know, then Where's your evidence? You need that security certificate deposit, or you need to dead that debt when you sign that promissory note and have your contracts and attach it to the note, right? And it doesn't alter the note. It's just instructions to the bank, right? Or it's not, um, or the instructions is not a contract that's directing the note itself. It's instructions to the bank, what they have to do as a part of the contract of exchange, value for value, value and consideration for value and consideration. So let's read what a the definition of what a promissory note is. Okay, so this is Section 9-102 of the State of Maryland Commercial Law, or State of Maryland Uniform Commercial Code, which is the same in your state, should be generally, you know, close to it, but generally all the state laws are the same, which is modeled after the private Uniform Commercial Code. But this is actually state law, right? And when a bank comes into your state to do business, generally they have to abide by the state law, which is your power. You have a lot of power in your state law, right? A lot that you don't even understand, specifically when it comes to discharging debt. So let's define what a promissory note is, right? So we're right here, number 66. Paragraph 66, it says promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay a monetary obligation. Now, this is, if we're looking at it from the banking perspective, this is the credit side. This relates to the credit side of the bank, because once they get the promissory note, their assets increasing, and it is your contractual obligation, your contractual exchange or obligation of your exchange to pay, right? Your promise to pay, right? So when they say, well, did you make a payment? You're like, yeah, you accepted my promissory note. But again, you have to get a certificate of deposit, right? So when the student gives, before the student gives their um, gives the general promissory note. I can't remember, but when the student gives their promissory note, right, for the for when the bank purchases their note, there's a certain way that they have to endorse it, and they got to put a special endorsement on the note, and you also got to reserve your rights, right? And there's a thing called accord and satisfaction. That's if you're trying to pay for it right away. So in Maryland, when you're reserving your rights in the state of Maryland, it's 3-310, which is the code, the commercial law 3-310. And then it's for accord and satisfaction, it's 3-311 under Uniform Commercial Code of the state of Maryland, or what we call the State of Maryland Commercial Law. So, I myself, I put there's three codes that I put on here. Um, Actually, I'm sorry. 1-308 of the state of Maryland reserves your rights, right? And then 3-310 is another way that um, to discharge an obligation. There's a lot of ways. That's just one of them. In the state law, there's a lot of ways, but that's just one of them. And then 3-11 is accord and satisfaction by use of instruments, right? That's when you say, hey, this is paid in full. And you write that diagonally across in a conspicuous manner. And, you know, give your proper endorsement, a special endorsement, attach your instructions to the bank that you need your, and the bank agree that they're going to give you a certificate of deposit for them purchasing your note. And they are purchasing the note is a loan contract. So they are purchasing the loan contract, right? I know these terms are, might sound crazy to you. And this is like cognitive dissonance is telling you that this is crazy. That don't even sound right. Well, you're going to hear Richard Warner talks about some of this, but I'm giving you evidence of it. I just gave you the Federal Reserve. They told you what a loan is, how credit is created. They defined it and then told you how it is. Then I read you an example of when about the $1,000 bond that the bank gets, right? So promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay. That means you would pay a monetary obligation when the bank purchase your note. That is your payment. But we don't recognize that. And the way that we endorse things affects us paying for things twice, right? And even if you don't endorse it properly, my argument would be, well, there's nothing in the contract that says that I have to pay you twice. And then it's just a matter of you proving that you paid them the first time when they purchased your note. And that's an accounting argument, right? Um, that's also an economic argument if you understand economics as well, right? That's also a legal argument when we're talking about um, violation of the Securities Act, right? Your state and there's state and federal securities laws, right? It is a lot, but I mean, you're either gonna hire somebody to do the work for you, give you the explanation, or you're gonna do the research, or you're just gonna continue to do what you've always done, right? We have choices, and we have to live with those choices, right? So, promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay a monetary obligation. Does not evidence an order to pay, right? It doesn't evidence an order to pay. Does not contain an acknowledgement by a bank that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money. Let me read that again, that part again. Does not contain an acknowledgement by the bank that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money or funds. So you can say that the received for deposit is received as a debt of the bank. So when it says does not contain an acknowledgement by the bank that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money or funds, that acknowledgement is in the certificate of deposit, right? So the promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay a monetary obligation, does not evidence an order to pay, and does not contain an acknowledgement by a bank that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money or funds, right? It doesn't acknowledge that the bank received a sum of money or funds. So it's a promise to pay a monetary obligation. You promise to pay, but they purchase the note. And I know it sounds confusing, but that's what it is. So they get your promise to pay, which is your payment, because you're making a contractual exchange. And if they don't pay you, it's a breach of contract, right? Let's read it one more time, and then we're going to go back to the certificate of deposit. Promissory note means an instrument that evidences a promise to pay a monetary obligation, does not evidence an order to pay, and does not contain an acknowledgement by a bank that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money or funds, right? So the certificate of deposit acknowledge that the bank received a sum of money or funds and that they got to pay you. But your promissory note acknowledge that you're promising to pay a monetary obligation to the bank, right? And the bank purchased that monetary obligation per an exchange contract, right? And this contract um, is a performance contract, right? But you can make it an express contract, right? But this is, you have mechanisms in law that you don't even have to make it an express contract. But, it's good to cover all your bases. But if you know what you're doing, you don't even have to do that because you need to demand certain things. And if they don't want to do that, then don't engage with them, right? Um, so let's simplify let's simplify this definition, right? And we're gonna eliminate certain words, right? Or or phrases. So it can be simplified. So we could say promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay a monetary obligation and that the bank has received for deposit a sum of money or funds, right? The superfluous language or the extra and unnecessary language we just left out because it's not necessary. It has no, it's just extra details that confuses the point. The point is the promissory note is an instrument that evidence a promise to pay in a monetary obligation, right? Who cares if it don't evidence an order to pay, right? That's, we don't care about that. And who cares that it doesn't contain an acknowledgement by the bank, right? Because the acknowledgement is in the certificate of deposit. So that's extra language you don't need. So we could just say a promissory note means an instrument that evidence a promise to pay a monetary obligation and that the bank has received for a sum of money or funds. How do we know the bank received a sum of money or funds? Because the cash under the asset side of the bank balance sheet increases. It doesn't decrease. If they was paying out something, it would decrease, but there's increase without them giving you anything. Okay, so let's go back to certificate of deposit. Okay, so it says certificate of deposit means an instrument containing an acknowledgement by the bank, right? So these are certificate of deposit, promissory note are um, two sides of the same coin, right? The exchange contract, right? Certificate of deposit means an instrument, a promise, a note, right? containing an acknowledgement by a bank that a sum of money has been received by the bank and a promise by the bank to repay the sum of money. A certificate of deposit is a note of the bank. So on one side, you got the promissory note where you pay the bank after, well, that the bank gets a payment when they purchase the note, right? On credit, and then they have then the credit because it's an exchange creating the credit, but you can also say because you have an innate right to create credit, you also the promissory note is a credit in itself, right? It is also money as defined in Public Law 73-1. It is legal tender as defined in Public Law 73-1, right? Any draft bills of exchange, bank acceptances, um, you see that in the language in one of the parts of this video series. So, certificate of deposit, promissory note, two sides of the same coin, and that same coin is the proverbial, well, let me not say proverbial, but it is the exchange contract that develops between you and the bank when the bank uses words such as I've approved the loan, and then you give them your promissory note, which is really they purchased that note, or they say that's our lending policy. Lending means they purchase the note, or they say um, we gave you an extension of credit. Did you give me an extension of credit? Or did I give you an extension of credit when you purchased the note? And that's why the asset side of your balance sheet went up, right? Always remember that banking is primarily accounting. If you're not talking accounting when you're talking banking, you're not saying anything. You're wasting your time. So the extension of credit you gave the bank and what they supposed to their performance is payment of the deposit, which is the debt the bank owes you, right? So lending, extension of credit, is when the bank purchases your security on credit. You extend credit to them, and that's how their asset side increase, and also their liability, which is the debt side of the balance sheet, increases as well. And that's how you know that they owe you, because double entry bookkeeping means that both sides have to be affected, and the matching principles say you got to record this transaction when it happened, right? And they record it in their accounting ledger, which the nomenclature or the name, so-called name of them putting doing data entry of the goods, the fungible goods, which is the face value of the note into the accounting ledger, they say that is credit. Well, that is a misnomer because it's just accounting, right, of the transaction. And they use it as a misnomer saying that it's bank credit because all the things happen in the ledger as far as the tracking is concerned. So when you go to basically credit now is an exchange of accounting calculations, right? Or updating of accounting calculations for their specific um, electronic accounting, but that's not really credit. You create the credit and they just recorded it and they're doing the accounting transactions or the calculations, right? We have to be able to separate the two, right? Because if we keep saying that bank create credit, we are giving away our power because that's not what they're doing. They're doing the accounting, right? Which is an economic methodology. It is not the value. It is just accounting, right? So the merchant has his own accounting system that it's tied to as far as their bank. And they engage in accounting too. So when things are exchanged, value for value, buy a shirt and then you give them a note or you use the credit card, you are exchanging value for value, right? So the merchant get you get the item, the merchant get the accounting, which increases their accounting, right? In what we call an account. So their cash in their accounting increases the same. And then your cash decrease because you had a deposit that you had to pay them. So the certificate of deposit goes together. And your argument for your certificate of deposit is clear because the bank has to um, it has to keep a record of their customers' transaction, right? That's a legal liability, right? So them having a record of all your transaction, I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. What you're telling me what the law requires you to do, like what are you trying to say? That proves that I owe you something? No, that you're supposed to do that. That's the law says you're supposed to do that. And you know that, right? So one more thing. Let me see if I can find it here. I messed up. Uh, okay. Yeah. Let me try to find it. Okay. Okay. This is called. This is section 9104, control of deposit account. Right. Um. Okay. So here it says a secured party has control of a deposit account if the secured party is the bank with which the deposit account is maintained. The debtor, the secured party, and the bank have agreed in an authenticated record that the bank will comply with instructions originated by the secured party directing disposition of the funds in the deposit account without further consent by the debtor. The secured party becomes the bank's customer with respect to the deposit account. A secured party that has satisfaction, that has satisfied subsection A has control even if the debtor retains the right to direct the disposition of funds. Okay, so this is just saying that you're a secure party if you are a bank customer. These are the different options, but this would supersede because you become the secure party of the deposit account because you are the bank customer. That means that you have to make sure that if they create a deposit account, that they put it in your name, and that should be one of the stipulations. I can't find what I'm maybe. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can. Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties. Okay, so I've had some technical difficulties. I don't know what was going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video and we're going to jump into the third video because I think that this video has went on long enough. So let's get into the third video. Please like, subscribe, hate, do something. We love haters. We need haters, right? See you in the next video.